The world is shattering into war and conflicts, not only between the East and the West, but between Israel and Palestine, Lebanon and Iran. As a Jewish person, you must feel scared and in despair. To you, the world is a dangerous place. It is dangerous to everyone, but in your mind, to you, it's even more so. A place where Jews have been suffering since the start of history. A place where Jews have been a defenseless minority for the majority of history. Israel creates within you the perception of strength. It creates within you the feeling that the power is coming back. You are not anymore a defenseless minority, but through strength, violence and technology, you can rule and dominate your enemies. However, the security which you think you achieve, the power and dominion, it doesn't really amount to much. You reside in the Holy Lands after 2,000 years of exile. However, if even after your return you still feel unsafe, your skies are being bombed, your borders attacked, your cities filled with attacks and all sorts of frightening horrors. The situation is hopeless, and all you can do is hold on to that which gives you a moment of perceived domination. At this moment in time, you either wish for peace and an end to war to get away from the escalated situation, or you wish for the destruction and utter domination of your enemies. But let's reconsider. Before you continue in your ways, I urge you to reconsider the entire foundation of your beliefs. First of all, I'm not sure you even have deeply considered them. Let's assume that you haven't. So let's start with the most basic question that is the entire essence of your reality. What makes you a Jew? Is it your religion or is it your ancestral heritage? Well, in today's day and age, you can be an atheist yet still go under the term a Jew. You can be nearly as close to the disbelievers and pagans mentioned in the Old Testament, the ones whom your ancestors fought against and even killed for their own misdeeds, yet still fall under the same definition as a believing, Torah-observing, God-fearing person. In 2 Chronicles we find, "And they entered into a covenant to seek the Lord, the God of their fathers, with all their heart and with all their soul, but that whoever would not seek the Lord, the God of Israel, should be put to death, whether young or old, man or woman." And in Deuteronomy we find, "The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest, who stands to minister there before the Lord your God or the judge, that man shall die, so you shall purge the evil from Israel." And further in Deuteronomy we find, "If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, 'Let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the people who are around you, whether near you or far away from you, from the end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him, or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him, but you shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." Commanding the believers among the Jews that what they should be doing against those who, quote-unquote, do not seek the Lord, who doesn't obey the religious authority among them, who entices you to seek other gods. They shall, according to the Torah, be put to death. This speaks about you, the atheist Jew. So the problem here is that the term Jew has been conflated. It can only have one definition. It can't be two at the same time. Originally, Jew was a definition of the descendants of Judah, the forefather of one of the 12 tribes. Only one. However, it became a term for the adherents of the religious understanding of Judah and his descendants, and not the 12 collective tribes. Consequently, the term Jew now means a follower of that religious offshoot and is not a racial term anymore. Therefore, being a Jew is in actuality a definition of a person who observes and follows the religion of Judaism, something which only the Orthodox and the likes really do fall under, at least those who uphold the Sabbath and the dietary laws. As for the term which denotes your ancestral heritage, Israelite, not Israelian, is more appropriate. That's because an Israelite is a descendant of Israel, which is Jacob, the forefather of the Jews and the 12 tribes. Today, a person who is not a descendant of Judah can still be called a Jew, exactly because he follows the religion of Judaism. Therefore, the separation between Jew and Israelite as definition are more correct in actuality. The term Israelite denotes all the descendants of the 12 tribes with all their shared ancestral heritage, and Jew, an active follower of the religion of Judaism. And we find that in the Quran, it does in reality separate as such. This sets up for a following question. You claim to be Jewish, but in this case, are you really? Let's move on then. What is Judaism? Today's Judaism is an interpretation of the monotheistic faith and way of life that God chose specifically for the Israelites thousands of years ago, and with the Judaic understanding. A binding to God through a covenant that began with the patriarch Abraham and continued through Moses and the giving of the Torah. This covenant established the Israelites as a people chosen to live according to divine commandments, with a unique purpose to uphold the world's justice, holiness, and ethical values. These commandments, 613 in total, covering all aspects of life, are meant to cultivate a society of and in relation to God. Throughout history, the Israelites faced times of prosperity and times of great tribulation and suffering, including periods of banishment and exile by the hands of God. The exiles, such as those in Assyria and Babylon and later under Roman rule, were understood as consequences of collective moral and spiritual failings by the Jews, as mentioned by the rabbis themselves. The prophets warned these exiles beforehand, and even today these warnings serve as powerful lessons to continue submitting to God's will and desire, lest God's punishment will come upon us and anyone again. The actual reality and purpose of the religion can be seen through the readings of the Old Testament. The Roman banishment was the last one of the history of unified collective Jewry. And from a Jewish perspective, it serves as a big question mark as to what the next piece of the chapter is. For the Jews, there hasn't been another prophet, revelation, or anything of significant religious occurrence for over 2,300 years. And the period has traditionally seen as an exile of eschatological proportion. The final collective unification and utterance of God's kingdom would take place once the Messiah and its related signs would occur. The banishment from the land of Israel or Palestine by the Romans was a new rule that had to be accepted, and going against it was going against the will of God himself. This period of exile created still a hope for the coming of the Messiah. No, a new Messiah is now what they are waiting for, which will have Judaism accordingly in the center. A leader from the line of David who would in good God's timing gather the people back again and bring about an era of peace and justice. But in reality, is that actually possible? Are there any collective tribes today that serve as the ancestors of all the tribes? Or have they all become an integral part of almost every country in the world? Traditional Jewish teachings emphasize that this return and redemption will come through by divine intervention and not by human efforts to re-establish a land or sovereignty by force. Therefore, the Jews always awaited for the Messiah and not the return of any state, dominion or power. It was only the consequence of the Messiah that this could occur. This means no establishment of the state and no return until the Messiah would do it. So this is in stark opposition to Zionism. And what is Zionism? Zionism, as with any other political nationalist ideology, is a sort of tribal collective psychological phenomenon with systematic roots in the Western Hemisphere, created by people like Theodor Herzl and other acclaimed Israelites who were all atheists, deniers of God, deniers of their prophetic history and the theistic reality. Like any other nationalistic ideology, it seeks to ensure the protection of one people and one people only. But what makes Zionism unique is that despite the founders and the majority of the people's adherence to atheism, they used the Bible and Judaism somewhat to justify their return and the ideology as a whole. Jewish history for them was not religious. The history categorically taken from the Old Testament is not to be taken at face value. In actuality, the Bible can't be trusted, according to them, and therefore the connection to the land is a mere reinterpreted historical one which removes all of Judaism in totality except for a reimagined collective historical understanding. From the use of political force, survival of the fittest, and with total lack of remorse and morals, Zionism has spread utter destruction from the moment it entered the Holy Land. European so-called Israelites entered en masse step by step with complete disregard for the local and neighboring populations. Aligned with the Western Hemisphere while being geographically situated in the East, it created a shift in the global world order. Jews had lived for thousands of years across the Middle East, from Gaza itself, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and pretty much every Muslim country from as far as Morocco to Tajikistan. They had created communities with distinct religious and cultural traditions, majority of which were living in peace with their neighbors and under the protection of the rulers, majority of whom were intermixed with, accustomed to, part of, and even more importantly, historically loyal to the local and regional population. You will find across all the historical sites of Jewry that they fought alongside their neighboring Muslims in case of external attacks and threats, whether it was the Crusades, which saw Jews and Muslims fight side by side with blood up to their knees in Jerusalem against Christian barbarians, or the Mongols who wrought havoc for decades across Muslim lands. But now, for the first time, these centuries-old and ancient communities, at the same time and all at once, were all abandoned and completely destroyed due to the political disturbance which Zionism created. In Iraq, mainly in Baghdad, we find that a Mossad false flag operation was created in efforts to instigate further fear and terror in the local Jewish population, as well as fragmentation and hatred between groups. The Mossad operations went so far as with false flag bombings of Jewish synagogues, meaning bombings of Jewish synagogues done by Jews where the blame was put on the Muslims. Historian Avi Shlaim, who is of Iraqi Jewish descent himself, stated in his 3 Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew, that there is undeniable proof of Zionist involvement in the terrorist attacks, which prompted a mass exodus of Jews from Iraq between 1950 and 1951. He believed, as with majority of Iraqis who came to Israel after the events, that most of the bombings against Jews and violence in Iraq were the work of Mossad. Hundreds of testimonies, if not thousands, exist from Iraqi Jews who realized who were behind these false flag events. Shlaim believed Mossad partook in these actions to quicken the transfer of the 110,000 Jews in Iraq to the then newly created state of Israel, who needed manpower at the time. The Iraqi Jews had already rejected going to the state, hence why they were among the last groups to travel to Israel. That's because they felt that they were Iraqi. In addition, the Iraqi authorities had made it illegal to travel or move to the newly established Zionist state. While the Zionists claim that the Muslims kicked them out, the Muslims made it illegal to travel to the state. How ironic isn't that? Because this is the power of the Zionist narrative and what the proponents want you to believe. The Muslims kicked the Jews out, and that because of their sheer barbarism and Jewish hatred, as if Jews are the center of the world, destroyed the Jewish communities and heritage. Of course, thanks to Zionism and the State of Israel, Jews could be saved and live freely in peace and in safety. There has scarcely been bigger lies told in the world. We can hardly deny these days that the media instigates fear-mongering on its populace, especially in Israel, simply by the fact that fear is a powerful driver that leads to more reads, clicks and engagement. But beyond that, fear is necessary within the state, for without fear, the populace is not held in check, prevented from committing crime, law and order. However, if it is one ideology that has benefited from such a tactic, it is Zionism. For every time that a pogrom, massacre or anti-Semitic attack occurs outside of Israel, more Jews acknowledge that Zionism is needed and flee to the state for military protection. Therefore, fear and terror is critical for Zionism's survival, as well as instability and suffering of the neighboring lands, so that it can itself prosper. Jewish history under Islamic rule. Now we're going to talk about how the Jews lived under Islamic rule. Comparing that, the importance that Islam has to Jewish history cannot be understated. In Oxford's historian David Wasserstein's lecture titled How Islam Saved the Jews, as well as several books or articles, by the way, he is a Jew himself, he discusses how by the early 7th century, Jews under Christian rule mainly faced significant challenges, including legal and societal pressures, and was culturally diminished. The rise of Islam, which unified vast regions, provided Jews with legal recognition, economic opportunities, and cultural conditions that enabled a renaissance of Jewish life and thought. While the Jews of Europe were being massacred, expelled and burned alive, collectively being put responsible for that which wasn't directly their fault, such as Jesus' death and plagues, the Jewish Golden Age occurred under Islamic rule, in an Islamic caliphate under Sharia law, an age which saw the cultural, spiritual and material peak of Jewry for thousands of years since the last exile. You found Jews who not only worked in the caliphate but became prime ministers, such as Samuel ibn Nigrilla of Granada, who also led the local Muslim army for 17 years. Due to their dhimmi status, which means protected citizen, Jews were acknowledged and protected by the state politically, economically and militarily. But in this situation, they were even better off because the Islamic Caliphate acknowledges the Jewish religion, so much so that they are allowed to have their own separate legal court systems. That tells you how much religious freedom they had categorically across the entire Islamic world. While it is true that there was instances of violence against Jews in Muslim lands, professor and historian Mark R. Cohen states that historically anti-Jewish sentiments in Islamic societies were much less systematic and severe compared to those in Christian Europe. Because they were a protected citizen, there was an inherent acceptance and integration of them that we didn't find in Christian Europe. In totality, this is a drastic difference that led to a total shift in the world's Jewish heritage. When the Spanish Inquisition occurred, which saw Muslims and Jews expelled Muslim lands such as in Morocco and Turkey, we saw the Ottoman Empire at the time and these countries massively integrating and accepting the exiled Jews in the hundreds of thousands. The heritage was preserved by Jews, leading up all the way until what?